My wife told me I was too boring to be wanted and left me for her ex, the one who actually lived on the edge. I didn't argue. I just disappeared from her life. A few months later, he was facing federal charges, and she was standing at my parents' door in tears. My name is Andrew. I am 38 and I work as a project manager for a regional construction company. I live in a mid-sized city in the Midwest where most weeks follow a steady rhythm. Early mornings on job sites, emails in the afternoon, home by 6. I run a few miles most nights and keep my weekends structured. I have never chased chaos. I prefer things that last. My wife is Brianna, 35. We were married for 6 years and together for 9. We own a house in a quiet neighborhood with trimmed lawns and predictable neighbors. No kids, but fully merged finances, shared retirement plans, and a joint calendar that was usually booked 2 months out. From the outside, we look stable. Brianna has always had a sharper personality than I do. Quick sarcasm, quick boredom. She likes attention and momentum. I knew that when we started dating. I just assumed that once we build something solid, that would matter more than constant stimulation. For most of our marriage, I handled the long-term structure. Mortgage, insurance, investments. She works in marketing and thrives on social environments. Networking events, late drinks with clients, weekend trips with friends. I never restricted her schedule. I trusted her judgment. About 8 months ago, the tone shifted. Small comments at first. She would call our life predictable in a way that did not sound appreciative. She started describing me as safe, and not kindly. It came up more often after she reconnected with old friends on social media. Then one night at dinner, completely unprompted, she looked at me across the table and said I was too boring to be wanted. Not too boring for her. Too boring to be wanted at all. I asked her what that meant. She said some people live on the edge and some people watch from a sidewalk. Then she mentioned her ex, Marcus. The one she dated in her 20s before we met. The one who, according to her, actually lived. I did not argue. I asked if she was unhappy. She said she was restless. That I was reliable, but not exciting. That sometimes she wondered what it would feel like to be with someone who took risks instead of calculating them. At that point, it was still just talk. I did not realize she had already decided to test that theory. After that dinner, I did not explode or accuse. I asked direct questions. Are you talking to him again? She hesitated for half a second, which was enough. Then she said they had reconnected casually. Just catching up. She framed it like nostalgia, like running into an old classmate. I asked how often they were talking. She said occasionally and rolled her eyes, like I was being territorial over a ghost. Over the next few weeks, occasionally turned into frequently. I would notice her smiling at her phone in the evenings. She angled the screen away when I walked by. When I asked who it was, she would say friends, co-workers, people who are not trying to die of boredom. That word boredom started to surface a lot. One night, she came home later than usual. She had been out for drinks with colleagues, or at least that was what she said earlier in the day. When she walked in, she looked energized in a way I had not seen in months. Almost electric. I asked how the event was. She said it was not an event. She met Marcus for a drink. Not defensive, not apologetic, just factual. I asked where she did not mention that beforehand. She shrugged and said, because you would have made it weird. She said she is allowed to see people from her past without asking for permission. I agreed that she is allowed to see who she wants. I also said that transparency is different from permission. That irritated her. She said I was insecure because I knew I could not compete with someone who actually lived. She described him as spontaneous, as someone who did not care about rules, someone who took what he wanted. I asked what exactly that meant. She said he started a few businesses that failed, but at least he tried. She said he had stories. She said when she is with him, she feels like something might happen. I told her something is always happening. Mortgage payments are happening. Retirement savings are happening. Stability is happening. She laughed. Not kindly. She said that is exactly the problem. You think a balanced budget is thrilling. I did not raise my voice. I asked one more direct question. Are you considering leaving? She did not answer right away. She looked at me like she was measuring how much truth she wanted to reveal. Then she said, maybe I already have. When she said maybe I already have, she did not mean physically. She meant emotionally. And she wanted a reaction. Over the next few weeks, she became more direct about Marcus. Less subtle. She would mention him in comparisons, in passing, in arguments. Marcus takes risks. Marcus does not live by spreadsheets. Marcus does not ask permission to feel alive. I asked once if she was planning to leave. She said she did not know yet, which I now understand meant yes. Then one night, she came home late and sat across from me at the kitchen table like she was delivering a performance review. She said she had clarity. She said being with Marcus reminded her what real chemistry feels like. She said she felt desired in a way she had not in years. She said I was stable, dependable, responsible. Then she looked at me steadily and repeated it. You are too boring to be wanted. She expected an emotional collapse. I could see it in her posture. She wanted tears or rage or a speech. Instead I stood up. I told her this house is in my name. I bought it 3 years before we married. I am not going to share it with someone who openly says she does not want me. She blinked, like she miscalculated. I said if you believe that, then you need to pack a bag and leave tonight. She laughed at first and asked if I was serious. I told her I was completely serious. I will not compete with your ex inside my own home. If you are choosing him, then go be with him. But you will not test drive that decision while sleeping in my bed. Her tone shifted fast. She accused me of being controlling. I told her there is nothing controlling about refusing to house your replacement plan. She tried to soften it, saying she had not officially decided. I reminded her she just told me I was too boring to be wanted. I went upstairs, pulled out a suitcase, and set it on the floor. You have an hour. She stood there, stunned, then angry, then suddenly defensive. She said I was overreacting. She said couples work through rough patches. I told her this stopped being a rough patch when you started advertising another man as your upgrade. I did not yell. I did not insult her back. I just stayed firm. Within 45 minutes, she had packed essentials. Clothes, toiletries, her laptop. I told her we would contact attorneys in the morning and file for divorce. I would not drag this out. At the door she said I would regret this when I realized no one else wanted someone like me. I answered calmly, that is a risk I am willing to take. Then I closed the door and locked it. The next morning I called a lawyer. The next morning I called a lawyer before I went to work. Not because I was emotional, because I prefer structure over ambiguity. I explained that my wife had moved out voluntarily and that the house was premarital property in my name. I asked what immediate steps I should take to protect myself financially. By the end of the day, I had opened a separate bank account, redirected my direct deposit, and scheduled a formal consultation. We did not have children, which simplified things. Our shared accounts would need to be divided, but nothing about the asset structure was complicated. Brianna texted me around noon. Are you actually filing? No apology, no ownership, just disbelief. I responded once. Yes, my attorney will be in contact. She called immediately after that. I let it ring. Then a longer message came through about how I was escalating unnecessarily, how every marriage has turbulence, how I was proving her point about being rigid and transactional. I did not respond. Later that evening another message arrived. Marcus is different in real life than in memory. He is intense. Living with him is not what I expected. I read the message twice. Then I blocked her. Not out of anger. Out of pattern recognition. The moment instability appeared, she was already testing whether the stable option was still accessible. I was not going to the contingency plan. I blocked her number. I blocked her on every platform we had used. I changed passwords on shared streaming accounts and removed her access to the home security app. Communication from this point forward could go through attorneys only. The silence after that was immediate and clean. About 6 weeks passed without direct contact. I focused on work, met with my lawyer, filed the initial divorce petition. Routine returned in a way that felt calm, not empty. Then one evening a mutual acquaintance sent me a link to a local news article. Marcus's name was in the headline, Federal Investigation. I read the article carefully, and suddenly, her idea of living on the edge had a very specific meaning. The article was not vague. Marcus had been indicted as part of a federal investigation into wire fraud and interstate financial crimes tied to one of his recent ventures. The language was clinical, structured, dates, amounts, co-conspirators. It was not a rumor or a misunderstanding. It was formal. I read it twice, then once more. This was the man who actually lived, the one who took risks, the one who did not worry about consequences. 2 days later, a second article appeared. Arrest made. Court date scheduled. Bond hearing pending. I did not reach out. There was no reason to. My life was legally and practically separating from hers. About a week after the arrest, my mother called me. She sounded uneasy. She asked if I had heard from Brianna. I told her no. I had blocked her weeks ago. There was a pause. Then she said Brianna had shown up at their house, unannounced, crying. That detail landed differently than the indictment. My parents live 30 minutes away. Brianna had not spoken to them since the night she left. Now she was at their front door. According to my mother, she looked exhausted. Not dramatic crying. Not performance. Just red eyes and disorientation. She asked if she could come inside. My father let her in, but made it clear I was not there, and that this was not a back channel to me. She told them Marcus had been arrested in front of her. That federal agents showed up early in the morning. That she had no idea the scope of what he was involved in. She claimed she thought his businesses were just aggressive, not illegal. My mother asked her directly why she was there. She said she did not know where else to go. That part stood out. She had chosen edge over stability. She had framed me as unwanted. And now, when the edge cut back, she was standing at my parents' door instead of at a friend's or a hotel. My father told her something simple. Enter is already filed for divorce. Apparently, she went quiet when he said that. Like she expected a delay. Like she assumed there was still room to negotiate. There was not. My mother told me she did not let Brianna stay long. She offered her water. Let her sit for maybe 20 minutes. Listened without validating anything. Then she asked a direct question. What exactly are you asking for? Brianna apparently struggled to answer that. She said she made a mistake. She said she misjudged Marcus. She said she had been caught up in nostalgia and ego. She said she thought she wanted unpredictability, but did not expect criminal charges and federal agents at 6 in the morning. My father asked her if she had known about any of his business practices. She said no. That she assumed he exaggerated success like he exaggerated everything. That she thought the risk was personality, not prison time. Then she asked if I hated her. That detail irritated me more than anything else she had done. Not because of the betrayal. Because of the framing. Hate suggests passion. Hate suggests emotional investment. What I felt was clarity. My father told her he could not speak for me. That I had handled the separation decisively, and that she should assume I meant what I did. She asked if she could come back to the house to talk. He told her no. He told her if she needed to communicate, she could do so through her attorney. That showing up at my parents' door was not appropriate. According to my mother, that was the moment Brianna started crying harder. Not loud. Not theatrical. Just the kind of crying that happens when the last door you assumed was unlocked was out to be closed. After she left, my father called me back and asked what I wanted them to do if she showed up again. I told him not to let her in. Not because I am vindictive. Because boundaries only work if they are consistent. That evening, I checked with my attorney to confirm that the divorce petition had been officially served. It had. The response deadline was set. There was no legal path backward unless I initiated it. And I had no intention of doing that. About 10 days after she showed up at my parents' house, her attorney contacted mine. The tone had shifted. Instead of arguing over asset division or contesting the filing, they were asking about temporary financial support. Nothing aggressive. Just exploratory language about hardship and transitional assistance. I read the summary my lawyer forwarded me and noticed something consistent. There was no denial of what happened. No challenge to the grounds for divorce. Just an implied suggestion that given the circumstances, perhaps I might reconsider terms. Circumstances meaning Marcus being in federal custody. My attorney asked me directly whether I had any interest in pausing proceedings. I said no. Then I asked a practical question. Is there any legal obligation for me to support her beyond equitable division? He said no. We both work. There are no children. The marriage length does not automatically trigger long-term spousal support, especially given her voluntary departure. That was all I needed. Later that week, Brianna emailed me from a new address. It bypassed the block, but went straight to a filtered folder I had set up for anything divorce-related. The email was not aggressive. It was subdued. She said she was staying with a friend temporarily, that the investigation around Marcus was worse than she thought, that assets were frozen, that people were being questioned. She claimed she had no involvement, but was being pulled into interviews as someone close to him. She wrote that she never expected things to escalate like this, that she confused chaos with chemistry, that she mistook volatility for passion. Then she wrote something that stood out. You were never boring. You were safe. I just did not appreciate it. I read the email once. Then I forwarded it to my attorney and did not reply. Appreciation after collapse is not insight. It is consequence. A few days later I learned through a mutual contact that Marcus was being held without bond pending further hearings. The charges were substantial enough that this was not a short-term scare. Brianna had wanted someone who did not worry about rules. Now she was attached to someone defined by breaking them. I do not feel vindicated. I felt confirmed. A month passed with no direct contact. The divorce moved forward in clean, incremental steps. Financial disclosures were exchanged. Account balances documented. Household items itemized. There were no dramatic disputes over furniture or kitchen appliances. The legal tone stayed procedural. Then my attorney called me instead of emailing. He said Brianna's legal team had requested a short delay in finalizing the settlement, not to contest the divorce itself, to address what they described as potential exposure. I asked exposure to what? He explained that federal investigators had been interviewing people connected to Marcus, including Brianna. There was no indication she was being charged, but her proximity had triggered scrutiny. Her name had appeared on a few business-related documents. Nothing criminal on its face, just enough to require clarification. That was the first moment I felt something close to concern. Not for the marriage, for liability. I asked my attorney directly whether any of that could reach me. He said unlikely, given a timeline and separation, especially since she moved out before the arrest and there was no shared business activity. Still, he recommended we keep documentation organized and avoid informal communication. I told him I had already blocked her everywhere except official channels. 2 days later, my mother called again. Brianna had not come back physically, but she had left a handwritten letter in their mailbox. No envelope, just folded paper. My father did not open it. He asked if I wanted it. I told him to bring it to me unopened. When I read it that evening, it was different from the email. Less polished, less strategic. She wrote that she had confused adrenaline with love, that she thought leaving would force me to fight for her, that when I did not, she doubled down out of pride. She admitted she liked provoking a reaction and mistook calm for indifference. She said when Marcus was arrested, the first person she wanted to call was me. Not because she loved him less, because she trusted me more. That line stood out. Trust is not built on excitement. It is built on predictability. She ended the letter by saying she did not expect forgiveness. Just a conversation. I folded the paper back along the original crease. Then I put it in a drawer with the divorce paperwork. Some conversations are only attempts to reopen options, and I was not an option anymore. 2 weeks after the letter, I received notice that Brianna had formally responded to the divorce petition. She was not contesting it. No attempt to delay. No claims of reconciliation. Just a clean acknowledgement and agreement to move forward under the proposed terms. That told me something important. Either her attorney advised her that fighting would be pointless, or she had finally accepted that I was not reconsidering. Around the same time, another update surfaced about Marcus. Additional charges were filed. Financial records unsealed. The scale of what he had been involved in was larger than the first article suggested. Not just aggressive business tactics. Structured fraud across multiple states. I read the coverage once and closed it. There was no satisfaction in it. A few days later, Brianna emailed again. Shorter this time. She said she had moved into a small apartment. That interviews with investigators were ongoing, but she was not a target. That she was rebuilding quietly. She wrote that she understood why I cut contact. She said she had mistaken stability for stagnation and arrogance for confidence. Then she asked one final question. If none of this had happened, would you have fought for me? It was the first time she had framed anything as a question instead of a declaration. I considered it for exactly 1 minute. Then I typed a response. If none of this had happened, you would still believe I was too boring to be wanted. I did not elaborate. I did not attack. I did not reopen old ground. There was the only direct reply I sent her after blocking her months earlier. It felt appropriate to answer the question clearly. A week later, the divorce was finalized. No courtroom drama. No speeches. Just signatures and stamped documents. 9 years condensed into paperwork. The house remained mine. The accounts were divided. There were no lingering financial ties. For the first time since that dinner where she called me boring, everything was quiet in a way that felt permanent. It has been 4 months since the divorce was finalized. Marcus eventually entered a plea agreement. The charges were real. The penalties were not small. The news cycle moved on quickly, but the consequences did not. Brianna sent one last message through her attorney after everything was signed. It was not about money, not about property. It was a short note asking if I would ever be open to coffee. No expectations. Just a conversation between two people who used to share a life. I did not respond. Not because I am angry, because closure is not a social event. When she left, she framed me as insufficient. When she came back to my parents' door, she framed herself as mistaken. Both versions centered her experience. What never changed was the underlying choice. She equated volatility with value. She saw steadiness as a flaw. That belief did not appear overnight, and it would not disappear because volatility turned out to include handcuffs. People often assume that the person who stays calm is the one who feels less. That if you do not beg, you do not care. That is not true. I cared enough to remove myself from a situation where I was being compared like a product. I cared enough to refuse the role of backup plan. I cared enough to end something the moment it was openly disrespected. Being called boring did not break the marriage. What broke it was contempt. Once someone looks at you and sees stability as weakness, the foundation is already compromised. The house is still quiet. My routine is still steady. Work continues. I run in the evenings. I see friends on weekends. Nothing about my pace has changed. The difference is that I no longer have someone across the table measuring my worth against chaos. She wanted edge. I wanted consistency. Only one of those survives federal charges. That is the whole story.